Okay, we will now move to item 3, public open forum. May I just check, Tony, your mic is on. Did you wish to speak? Oh. Okay, public open forum. This is the opportunity for members of the public to address the committee to raise any concerns or relevant matters. Wendy, have we any members of the public who wish to address us?
No, Chair.
Okay, in which case we'll move on to the action list. There's 4 actions in the action list. We'll start, as is tradition, with the first one, and that's in relation to a paper, possibly an informal paper on finance team capacity. Members will be aware this is a long outstanding paper, so I can see John Davis, Head of Finance, is on the line. John, could you kindly give us an update in terms of where we are with this paper, please?
Yeah, afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think I communicated via email over the past week or so that the paper is nearing completion. It's not a paper that is going to come in front of the committee as a report as such. So this is very much an operational paper that outlines the changes required to the finance structure. It's, as I say, nearing completion, so I'll hopefully be able to share that with yourself, Chair, at the same time as it goes across to Peter as in his role as Chief Officer for Resources to be able to consider and sign that off under Peter's role. So, yeah, hoping to be shared this week. It's nearing completion. It doesn't mean an easy one because it encapsulates quite a few temporary arrangements that we've had in place. So just needed to bottom those out before bringing that forward as a final version. Hopefully that gives enough of an update, Chair.
Yeah, so John, thanks for the update. We did discuss it at the pre-meet a week or so ago. Given how long it's taken to see the light of day, I did strongly indicate that I'd want a paper by the end of this month, which is effectively tomorrow. So I would like it, warts and all, tomorrow, please. Are you happy to do that?
I'll work towards that, Chair. I'll take a look through and hopefully share something at the same time that it's sent over to Peter. Yeah.
Thank you, much appreciated. Okay, moving on to the other actions. Actions 2 is not due until next month. I'm not going to go to Matt unless he signals that he wishes to update this point, but I look forward to seeing that paper at next month's committee. Item 3 is included within Richard Jones's excellent paper on risk management under item, where is it? It's there. Oh, item 6. Couldn't see it for looking. So I wasn't going to ask Peter Davis to provide an update unless he wishes to at this stage. And similarly with item 4, that's not due until late in the year, so no update of this point is required. If we could then move on to item 5. Item 5 is the Audit Wales Programme Council. Audit Wales Work Programme Council Progress Update. And I believe this item is going to be introduced initially by Hannah Carter, Performance Analyst. So Hannah, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so today we have the Audit Wales Work Programme Progress Update for members to review. This is a 6-monthly report that was last presented to the committee back in October. So this report provides an update on the progress being made by the Council in implementing the findings of Audit Wales reviews. This includes both local and national studies published by Audit Wales. So for our local studies, recommendations that we deem require further attention are marked as open. And then when a recommendation has been assessed as being adequately addressed, it's marked as closed and an explanation why provided. So the local reviews currently marked as open can be found in Appendix 1. These include a review into financial sustainability and also a review into asset and workforce management. As well as these local studies, Audit Wales also publish national studies. And whilst the findings of these studies may not always be specific to Monmouthshire or necessarily pertinent, we do share these with the most appropriate service area to consider their findings and recommendations and to respond accordingly. and the Council's management response to national studies can be found in Appendix 2. There's been just one national study published since the last update provided to the committee, and this is into regeneration of brownfield sites. Something to note for the committee is that the management response template for our national studies has been adjusted very slightly to include a responsibility holder and timescale, and this is to ensure alignment with Audit Wales's organisational response forms that we are required to complete following these national studies. The committee is asked to scrutinise the Council's response to the Audit Wales work programme and seek assurance that adequate progress is being made. They are also able to refer any issues contained within the national studies for other committees to consider where they identify their findings that may require some further scrutiny. And I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on the report.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Let's go to members first for questions and comments. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Hannah. It's a helpful report. If I'm right in reading this, these are only the open Audit Wales recommendations, so there are some which have been closed. It would be helpful, not for this time, but in future, just a brief summary of the ones that have been done, just so we understand what action has been done to make sure we can close those off happily. Specifically then on the Appendix 1 that's here today, and the finance proposals, the bottom one under finance proposals on page 6 of the paper talks about robust detailed review of planned savings brought forward to ensure impact on service delivery is mitigated where possible. And it says March 24. That's so I presume that hasn't yet happened or is in progress.
Yes, so this is referring to setting a balanced budget, which was then done in March 24. So that's why it's noted as March 24. So that action has been done.
But it's because it's part of a bigger overall action which hasn't yet all been done. That's why it's still open. Okay, that's really helpful. A couple of other places, however, where the actions are marked as ongoing. How on earth do we ever close off an ongoing action?
Yeah, I think that's just first point about closed actions as well. I think that'd be helpful, and I'll come on to the ongoing one. Yeah, in terms of closed, there aren't any actually within this report that are closed, but just to say when we close an action, we will also include a rationale for closing it within this report. And also, I know Audit Wales colleagues on the call are planning further follow-up work on closed actions as well. So that may help the committee and certainly help us as an organisation. In terms of ongoing, I think it's a fair challenge. I think some of the nature of the actions, as Hannah's just described, we'll have a specific end date, so we'll set the budget on a certain date and we can say that action's closed. Some of the things we're doing are looking at ongoing incremental improvements to how we're delivering services. So take the one in front of me around the asset management plan. Has now been put in place. Within that, there are a range of actions and activities that will set out different milestones and measures which they want to deliver. It's difficult for us in one paper to wrap all those up at a headline level too, but I think it is a fair challenge and something I think we'll take back to when we're working with service areas who are responding to these, to try and pin down clearer timescales, so both we and you can hold them to account for delivery, and I'm sure Audit Wales colleagues would say the same.
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful. What I don't want to do is force officers into setting unrealistic deadlines to get things done. So I'd like them to sort of think about these things, and if it is complex and it is going to take a while, let's be honest and say it'll take a year, it'll take however long it takes. But I hate ongoing because, as I said, you can never close it off, can you? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments, please? Okay, before I turn to Audit Wales for their sort of views on this paper, please, Sarah, I didn't see you.
With regard to the empty land and buildings piece, I note the response. I mean, we don't have the same issues in Monmouthshire that a lot of authorities do. And I know that officers are aware of where the brownfield sites are and what they are, and of course it's great that the authority is sort of putting its own house in order first through the asset strategy. But I wondered whether we are actually meeting the challenge that we've been given with Audit Wales to be ambitious and interventionist, and whether these sites that are in the around the county, are we aware of which, collectively as an authority, and being aware that that's very much cross-departmental, have we identified those sites which are not coming forward in the normal, through the normal course of things, through the LDP or through anything else, and where the authority may need to intervene to avoid that site becoming continuing to be a blight? I mean, I'm sure we can all identify a few around the county which are where there are eyesores where nothing appears to be happening.
I think it's difficult for us to answer that without no response on the service here. I think in bringing the paper forward to the committee, there's probably two roles you've got. One is assuring yourself around the initial response. So the second one is if you think there are elements here that could be followed up in more detail, that could be something, for example, you refer on to a scrutiny committee, for example, to look at where this obviously is. I know the planning policy and the local development plan, for example, is already part of the work programme. Secondly, more specifically, we can take that question away and ask for the service area to provide a written response. So I'll leave it to the committee to decide what further action I want to take, but I'm happy to take the specific question back, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Sarah. You made some important points there. How do you wish to play it? We can ask the officers to come back to us with a further update, or we could refer to scrutiny, or even potentially ask a relevant officer to attend this committee, albeit I'm not very keen on that last option. Have any thoughts, please, Sarah?
Perhaps to identify whether we have a list as an authority. Do we have a list of the brownfield sites in the county and the sites in need for regeneration, and are we aware of the current status of those? And I'm sure Phil will know more than I do.
Okay, Phil, please.
Quite honestly, Chair, that's one for the replacement local development plan, which is due to be announced by Cabinet in September. So I think Sarah would probably be better waiting until she gets that, because whatever there is at the moment could well change by then.
Okay, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Page 11 on your report. I won't read all of it, but it says, the council has and continues to regularly involve communities in its development of the county. We engage with stakeholders throughout the development of the replacement local development plan, etc. I won't read all the paragraph. I think Jan knows where I'm coming from. Can you assure me that there will be that continued and regular involvement of communities, rather than just write it down on you?
I think, the response is given by the head of planning placemaking, highways, it's a long title, highways and flooding and regeneration manager. So that's what they've committed to do in line with the response. I can't personally be responsible for that, Chair, but again, we can ask if there's a specific question for the officer to respond.
Yeah, so I do have very much sympathies with Richard's view. So Tony, I don't know if it's best asking that question directly to the officer outside this forum, but if you're not satisfied, please bring it back, because it is sort of related to the points within this paper.
Yes, I do have concerns, yes.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Can I check with Sarah? Are you happy to wait to see the LDP in September?
I am, yes. Thank you, Chair. I think that's an excellent suggestion from Phil.
Okay, thank you. Just a few comments from me back to the finance proposals. Clearly a critical set of actions here, and we have as a committee asked to be engaged in the development of a financial strategy. And I do note that the financial strategy is on the agenda for our meeting next month, and I'm sure that will come forward as appropriate, which is really, really important. And certainly sort of the the scale of the actions set out here and a scale and what the sort of outcome actually desired is pretty significant and critical to the continuing sort of viability of this organisation. So look forward to seeing that, and also looking forward to seeing these actions closed out. Before concluding, may I just turn to Gareth Lucy and Jason Williams for their comments in terms of the adequacy of the Council's response, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, obviously, a lot of these comments relate to historical reports and outputs that we've made. So, we maintain a contact with council officers in terms of those responses, and carry out a range of follow-up work as well as appropriate. So, that work then provides us with the assurance we need that those are being taken forward. So ultimately, it's a combination of that ongoing dialogue and the follow-up work that'll provide assurances there, Chair.
Great. Okay, I take that you are broadly comfortable with what's set out. That is, there are no sort of contraindications. Thank you, Gareth. As I mentioned at the pre-meet, we will now move to item 11. Item 11 is the Audit Wales Performance Data Review. And I'll turn initially to Gareth Lucy to introduce the item. I think Jason Williams will then sort of provide a bit more sort of detail, and then turn to members for questions and comments. So back to you, Gareth, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Just to introduce myself, my name is Gareth Lucy. I'm the Engagement Director with responsibility for delivery of all audit work here at Monmouthshire County Council. I've recently taken over from Anthony Veal, who previously held the role. So just to introduce this work, first of all, before I introduce my colleague Jason in to talk through some of the detail of the findings. So this is a report on the Council's use of service user perspectives and consideration of outcomes when it comes to its performance information. This is a piece of work that we've performed across all 22 local authorities in Wales, so isn't a local audit risk that we've identified as such. This is a piece of thematic work that we've carried out all across the country. This report, therefore, forms the local output of that work for Monmouthshire, and we've got 21 other reports similarly being presented elsewhere across Wales too. It's worth flagging up at this stage that this is a report focusing on the use of service user perspectives and outcomes within performance information. So this isn't a wider review of the council's use of performance information, so its processes or its performance in that area. This is looking at a specific element of that. So I just ask members to bear that in mind as they consider the findings of this report. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read the report in detail to see the main findings coming out of it. You'll also see after the report in the agenda pack, the council have also completed our organisational response form on page 123 of the pack. That summarises the council's response to the recommendations that we've raised in the report as well. And although Jason will come on to those in a little more detail now, fundamentally we're satisfied at this stage around the content and sufficiency of that response from the council as well. So with that all summarised, Chair, I'll hand over to Jason now, who can run through some of the details of the report, and then hopefully we can hand over to a council officer then for a response in terms of their response to our report.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Jason Williams, Senior Auditor with Audit Wales. I've been working on this particular review, amongst others, and just to follow on from what Gareth has said, we carried out this review to answer the key question, which was, does the council's performance data enable senior leaders to understand the service user perspective and the outcomes of its activities to effectively manage its performance? We explored the performance information that was provided to senior leaders on the perspective of service users, the information on the outcomes of the council's activities, and arrangements to ensure that the data provided is correct. The overall finding that we came to within the report, and this is all detailed within the report, and I'll just pull little bits out as we go along, but the overall finding was that the council provides some performance information to enable senior leaders to understand the perspective of service users, but information on outcomes was limited in restricting the ability to manage performance effectively. The review's findings then, which fed into that overall finding, were as follows. So performance information provided to senior leaders includes some information, but it does not enable them to get a comprehensive understanding of the service user perspectives. We did find some examples of performance information which would help senior leaders understand the perspective of service users, but overall we found the information on the perspective of service users did not enable senior leaders to get a comprehensive understanding of how well services and policies are meeting the needs of service users, particularly given the breadth of services that are provided. Our next finding was regards to the performance information provided to senior leaders to help them understand the outcomes of the council's activities as being limited. So we found some information about outcomes. Much of the information in the council's reports is based upon outputs, however, and quantitative measures with limited evaluation of those outcomes and the outcomes of the actions. Our next finding was around the council has limited arrangements to ensure performance data reflecting the service user perspective and the outcomes is accurate. Now, the council has limited arrangements in place to routinely check the accuracy and quality of data and performance information. There were things such as performance measures guidance, which we looked through, and the principles of developing and checking performance measures. We looked at performance team undertake sense checks. And in consideration, we found that inaccuracies with performance information may not be identified if anomalies were not noted. So another one of the points was that there has been no sort of data quality audits that we had seen in the past 4 years. And as the council has limited arrangements, therefore, to assure itself that the service user perspective and outcomes data is accurate, there was then deemed a risk that performance information presented to senior leaders may therefore be inaccurate. Our next finding, as information provided on outcomes is limited, the extent to which the council can use this information to help it achieve its outcomes is also limited. Some performance information to enable senior leaders were found to understand the perspective of service users, but information on outcomes was found to be limited. And where we did find examples of the council providing information, we found some examples of the council then using that information and making changes. The next finding was that the council recognises that it needs to strengthen the quality and range of information available to it. The council has set new objectives in its community and corporate plan, with a focus on developing more localised data to better understand the lived experiences of its residents. So that was stated. It will be important for the council to benchmark and compare its performance arrangements, however, for collecting and reporting on outcomes and service user perspectives with other organisations. So having gone through that, coming to the final overall rather conclusion and finding, we came up with 3 recommendations, which I'll just summarise, as in the first was about the council should strengthen the information it provides to its senior leaders. The second was that the council should strengthen the information provided to senior leaders to help them understand the impact of its services. And that's with regards to outcomes. And then the third was the council needs to assure itself that it has robust arrangements in place to check the quality and accuracy of the service user perspective and outcomes data it provides to senior leaders. That report was produced, agreed, it's been agreed with the council, and it has been submitted with an ORF, an organisational response form. As was mentioned by Gareth, that's been returned to us, and our conclusion in that is that the council's response to findings, together with their planned actions, was deemed sufficient and appropriate. And that's basically it from me, I believe. Thank you.
So thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Jason. Really, really helpful introduction. From my perspective, a very important paper, and indeed it's a real challenge, not only for Monmouthshire, I bet, but for other local authorities in order to really address a number of these recommendations. So before going to members, I note that a number of these actions sit with Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager, as well as with Matt Gatehouse. Richard, did you want to say anything at this stage in terms of your confidence in delivering those actions, please?
Yes, Chair. I think overall, again, thank you for the Audit Wales work on this. It's timely, as mentioned, the input from Jason. We set the community and corporate plan. We're looking at developing our outcomes. Have this piece of work from Audit Wales to inform that is helpful. I think what I give some assurance to members is that we have some arrangements in place. We have performance monitoring reporting in place. We have a performance management framework in place, and we have regular timetable of work plans to report those in. I think what the report challenges on is strengthening that to focus on outcomes and outcomes in the service user perspective. Some of those things we have in place. I think the report cites some of those examples around things like our self-evaluation report, things like our director's reports coming from Chief Officer in Social Care and Health and Chief Officer Children and People. But nonetheless, as our management response covers, we're looking to strengthen those arrangements in the coming months and years ahead. So in terms of the key actions, there's a couple of key things we're looking to do. Firstly is strengthening the measures within the community and corporate plan to try and make sure there's focus on outcomes and the service user perspective as they can be, recognising that no one number alone will fully reflect that. And actually, I think as we've talked to this committee before about our self-assessment arrangements, bringing a wide range of evidence to support our self-assessment will be important, and that won't just be quantitative evidence, that'll be qualitative as well. And sometimes that will take a while to develop, review, evaluate and bring that forward, which is partly linked to one of our key second actions for both the first two recommendations, which is around working with service areas to strengthen their own information gathering and assessment through their service plans as well, because it's that then will feed some of our corporate reporting, and their service areas are the ones closest to the service users and the outcomes where they're being delivered as well. But again, just to reiterate, there are arrangements in place for that, and we do have good examples where that's in place. Nonetheless, it's about making sure that practice is even and consistent across our range of services as well. And the final action there that links to our self-assessment arrangements, which I've already covered. And then finally, around the third recommendation around the quality and accuracy of our information. Again, Jason helpfully alluded to some of the arrangements we have in place in terms of providing that assurance to ourselves around, do we have robust arrangements to check and quality assure performance data. I think a big part of it for us is not looking just at an endpoint check, but looking at data through its life cycle. So looking at when data is when it's first entered, how it's stored, how it's reported, how it's exported, validated and reported. And I think the way we're looking as our actions takes forward around a data maturity assessment is looking at across that whole life cycle, including some of the processes we have in place to do some of those endpoint checks, and part of that, I've spoken to Jan as well in terms of the work that we can jointly do with internal audit to strengthen some of those arrangements as well. So that's a brief overview and confidence in terms of where we go next, and obviously report that to committee. I don't know, Chair, if Matt wanted to add anything.
No, I think that was a sort of fairly comprehensive initial input from Rich, and obviously just your chair as needed to pick up any subsequent questions from the committee. Great, thanks both. So over to you members for questions and comments either to Audit Wales or to officers.
Only a quick one, Chair, and just a bit of clarification, really, on a general point. Audit Wales, in particular, there's various references to effectively, or what appears to be effectively, accepting the reports that are provided to senior managers as being correct. If they're doing a financial audit, that the information provided by officers and internal audit is correct. And there's a heavy reliance upon us getting what we give out that they look at being correct. So my question is, what tests go on that? Are we actually hanging ourselves when perhaps we shouldn't have done? There's a general question about how the effectiveness is worked through.
Thank you. So I think that's essentially a question about data accuracy and integrity. Richard, do you want to go into answering that, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Murphy. I think it's a good point. I think part of what we look at is different areas of responsibility, and then at each point those are different areas in essence of check. So if we take performance data as a line in this report, so obviously we'll have a responsibility holder in the service area who will be generating and producing that performance data. Part of our response around data maturity is making sure that they have the skill, support, awareness they need when they're producing their data to think of it through that life cycle. So has it been entered correctly? Are they validating it before then they pass it on to be used in the next chain in the cycle, as you described? The next part of that, in terms of, if I look specifically at the arrangements we have in place for the community and corporate plan performance measures, which are important to us because they are our headline measures of our objective as an organisation, we have, as described in the report, definitions, pro formas in place, which would calculate things like variance. Will ensure that the officer providing information is signing off that they're happy it's accurate. If there are variances flagged up, we as a team will act as, I suppose, a potential another check in that process to test then, why is something varied? Have you had a change in process? Have you changed your system? You know, has the performance gone up or down that much? Why? And that's another check in the line. And obviously we then report through two committees as well, who at the end point have a scrutiny challenge role. I know in liaison with the response to report with internal audit colleagues as well, you know, internal audit as part of their work programme will, where required or where they deem on a risk basis to be important, also test out some of the performance data and data arrangement services I have in place. So I think we have a process in place, but for me it's not just the process, it's making sure that the culture, the skills are embedded within that, and that's where I think our response will help working as a performance team and in liaison with audit colleagues as well as a whole system.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rich. Obviously a lot of care taken there. But can I just turn the question on Audit Wales then, please, and just see what their perspective is on that?
Yeah. Do you want to repeat your question for benefit of Audit Wales?
Basically, even though you acknowledge the amount of care which is taken in preparing reports and the information provided to you, what checks do you carry out to make sure that that is in fact the case?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Councillor for the question. Yes, ultimately, this is kind of the skill of the job, ultimately, as an auditor, is to assess the data that's put in front of you and come to a conclusion as to whether it's something that can be relied upon or whether further work needs to be done, and if further work needs to be done, what that work therefore is. So professional scepticism is really what underpins the work that we do. It's really just carrying that mindset forward to review every piece of information we get, be that for auditing the accounts or for a piece of performance audit work, and constantly assessing whether that is a viable and accurate piece of information. And sometimes that's more straightforward than others. So sometimes it's externally verifiable. Sometimes we may need to consult colleagues who may have greater knowledge and assurances in this area. Sometimes it's as simple as just asking further questions of the person who's provided it. And getting assurances that way. There's no set approach ultimately, but I suppose just please be assured from our part that this is something that underpins all of the work that we do, that we're never taking anything at face value, and as external auditors we have to question what we're provided at all times.
That was the anticipated response. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Gareth. Are there any Martin, please?
Thank you, Chair. I guess this is probably for you. In the recommendation responses, as you mentioned, recommendations 1 and 2, there's a bullet that says support service managers to strengthen the use of evidence. How are we going to do that? Is that going to be a training courses, training people how to use data? What does support service managers actually look like?
Yeah, I think it'll be a range of things. So, for example, Hannah and I responsible for setting up the service business plan process. As part of that, we have a range of guidance, training materials that we'll provide managers with, either generally offered or offered on a support or need basis. And we'll be developing some new material as part of that. So, for example, we'll be looking at doing some video recordings so we can have training available more regularly without holding a specific session. And also that will be part of we're part of various networks and performance networks. We may draw in specific training courses or support as available as well. So we've got a suite available. I think the challenge from the Audit Wales report is a welcome one in terms of that focus on impact is something we identified in our self-assessment process as well. So yeah, there'll be greater emphasis now as we move, in the next few months through the service business planning year to focus on training and supporting managers around self-assessment more so than we currently do.
That's really helpful, thank you.
Sarah, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think Martin's asked one of the questions I was going to ask. I think this is a really welcome challenge and very much echoes what I know is the administration's commitment to put the citizen experience at the centre of everything the council does and to use data robustly. I was also going to ask about the training and so on, but I'd like to ask Audit Wales is really how do we compare to other authorities in that, perhaps this is not something you could answer in this, but I know that we're always ready to learn from good practice elsewhere.
Thank you. Are you able to answer that, Gareth?
Yes, absolutely, and thanks again for the question. I think this is the really useful thing about performing these thematic pieces of work across all of the 22 councils, is that it allows us to compare, also allows council officers to compare, contrast, share and learn. And ultimately, that's what we're hoping for from this piece of work, is that it'll act as that catalyst for discussion and sharing. Ultimately, I think the conclusions we've drawn here are fairly consistent with what we've seen elsewhere. Again, wouldn't want to sort of preempt any other reports which may still be going through this process, but they'll all be findable on our website later on anyway. But it's fairly consistent. I think we found these sort of general themes of potential improvements that could be made in terms of enhancing the perspective of the service user and outcomes as part of performance management data. So I think the findings that we have here are certainly not unique. We certainly have seen similar themes elsewhere, and what we'd hope now is, like we say, councils could get together, share information and learn from that. But I suppose just as that final piece of reassurance, what you see here is not Monmouthshire being an outlier. I'd say this is very much part of being one of the pack, really, and it's just a matter of now the steps from here to further that improvement journey.
Okay, thank you. Helpful. Richard, would you like to come in there, please? Just
to add and thank Gareth for that helpful explanation, just to reassure the council that we're also part of networks with performance colleagues across other organisations, particularly through the WLGA. And as we look to develop out our use of outcome measure, we will be looking and networking with them in terms of other practice we can learn from and share.
Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. It was only a quick one for Richard. I was just thinking in terms of going forward, I just wanted to double check. You don't need to name them, but have you identified the service areas that are going to need additional support in doing that, the outcomes, evidence in the outcomes, and where they may need additional training?
Yeah, and I think we are going to look to be more targeted. So as part of our service business planning process, we do a quality assurance process. I say Hannah largely leads that, and Hannah's done a piece of work to review all 50 of our service business plans, looking at the quality of them in different areas, and where those have perhaps need more support in different areas, not just self-assessment, but they'll be on things like risk, for example, and others we'll be more targeted using that information we've gathered to focus on certain areas and supporting them to strengthen their arrangements initially. But equally, there will be an offer open for anyone who within the organisation who wishes to take it up as well.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so let's conclude this matter. May I once again extend our thanks to Gareth and Jason for their contributions. Please feel free to stay, but also please feel free to leave as you deem fit. Many thanks.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. We'll move back to item 6, which is the risk management paper. I think this paper is going to be introduced by Richard Jones, Performance Data and Insight Manager, and Hannah Carter. I understand there's going to be a presentation. I don't know in which order you want to take it, but maybe is the presentation first? Or do you want to introduce this paper? Which is easiest for you, Richard?
Is it okay if I introduce it and I'll hand over to Hannah, who will share a screen on the call for everyone, just to talk through a bit more detail about the changes and updates to the risk management policy we're proposing as part of the paper. Thank you for that, Chair. So there's two main parts to the paper before you today, committee. Firstly is to seek your feedback on our proposed revisions to the strategic risk management policy, which just said Hannah will talk you through shortly. And the second is to provide you with our own assessment of our implementation of our current risk management framework, and also to provide you an overview of our current strategic risks facing the organisation, which you'll now be familiar with is part of our regular 6-monthly reporting to you as a committee. Just to briefly provide a little bit more context on some of those parts, we'll hand it over to Hannah. So in terms of the updated strategic risk management policy, I think it's helpful to remind you why we've undertaken it now, both in terms of our own self-assessment arrangements, the feedback from this committee and the feedback from internal audit, and our general desire to strengthen risk management in the organisation has sort of led us to complete the review before you today. And obviously the evidence feedback from all those sources, including yourselves, has been considered as part of the policy. So thank you for your challenge and support in it so far, and welcome anything further today. I think it's important to emphasise that the policy review is largely built upon arrangements we have in place. It's not looking at radically changing the basis and foundation we've got, which I think has worked for us. It's looking at strengthening and developing on our arrangements through the policy. And we presented three parts to you to that today. Firstly, the policy itself. Secondly, the risk appetite statement, which is obviously a key development within the policy. And thirdly, we thought it was helpful just to attach the supporting risk guidance as well. And this is one of those, as I was mentioning earlier, one of those many guidance documents we have in place to support services to actually implement some of our policies. And in this case, this supports the guidance, this supports the policy, sorry, but as it's guidance, it's not formally part of it, but we thought it would be helpful to share with you as part of your scrutiny. The second part is our effectiveness of our assessment of our effectiveness of current strategic risks. Again, this is building upon, I think, the last assessment you provided you with, which was in February. One of the key updates just to bring your attention to, which we factored in, is we've had the conclusion of the internal audit review of our risk management arrangements, which we've considered as part of this assessment, and then that gave a reasonable assurance rating, with some areas of strength and some areas of development, lots of which we've embedded within the proposed revisions to the policy. And then final part is to provide you with an overview of our risk register, so the main updates, changes to risk levels, summary of the key mitigating actions that have taken place, that have been delivered or behind schedule, and in some cases in the last 6 months since it was last brought to you. And as you're familiar with now, the responsibility to scrutinise the actual full detail of the risk register will go to Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee in May, and the full register will then also be presented to Cabinet to be endorsed in June. Finally, Chair, I don't know if you want me to cover the action points on the work programme now, or do you want to come back to that?
Can I suggest we come back to it, because there's a lot here, we just need to unpick it. Okay. So finish introduction, then let's have presentation, and then go back, please, Richard.
I'll guide you through the policy changes.
I'll just share my screen and we have a short presentation to go through. So hopefully everyone can see that. Yep.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So Richard has just covered these main points, why we've done the review and the role of the committee. So if I just go through some key changes. So firstly, we've looked to expand the description and introduction of wider risk management arrangements that the Council has in place. So this has helped us to link strategic risk management with the wider arrangements, and then also to provide an additional level of assurance to both officers and members that the arrangements we have in place are wide-ranging and also robust. Secondly, we've looked to adopt the 3 lines model, which is derived from the UK Government's Orange Book on risk management. So this has helped us to more clearly define the responsibilities for risk management, including the separation of risk management and overseeing the risk management process. This will help us to delegate and coordinate risk management roles within the organisation. Next is the introduction of horizon scanning into our policy. So I'm sure you all know when identifying risks, there's a need to look at both what's currently happening, but also what is going to happen. And so we will use this horizon scanning model to produce a risk radar report on an annual basis. And this will outline potential risks that may impact Monmouthshire over coming years. So this will help us to identify key uncertainties and challenges that may affect our organisation's objectives and operations, and thus help us strengthen our risk identification arrangements. Next is the introduction of directorate risk registers. So these will help us to track and manage the most significant risks facing each directorate. We currently have over 50 service business plans, and these all feed into our single strategic risk register. And so these directorate risk registers will essentially form a middleman between these two and sit between them and help us strengthen our escalation, de-escalation and risk identification process. And will also help the directorates in facilitating more robust and often discussion of risk. Next is our risk monitoring and reporting. So we have worked to further define our risk monitoring and reporting arrangements. This includes setting out how each element of the risk monitoring process should monitor and manage risks and how these all link together. And we've also worked to outline our reporting arrangements on risk management, including the role of this committee in overseeing the effectiveness of risk management process. And the last significant change we want to highlight is our risk appetite statement. So we have worked to further define the organisation's risk appetite through setting a risk appetite statement. We've set a risk appetite range for various categories of risk based on organisational activity. So this includes strategic, financial and environmental, etc. The risk appetite ranges from a lower limit of averse to an upper limit of eager. And we've gone for this risk appetite range model to allow for differing risk appetite to be applied to different activity that may be contained within the same risk category. This risk appetite statement will sit separately to the risk management policy, and this is to allow for more regular review and update to ensure it remains relevant and appropriate. And so that's it for the key changes that we wanted to highlight in terms of the next steps for this policy. Following consideration of feedback from this committee, the policy will be presented to Cabinet in June for formal approval. And following Cabinet approval, we will work to embed the proposed changes and strengthen the arrangements that are currently in place as part of a phased introduction and work with officers to embed this policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Let's go back to Richard. Richard's going to pick up and cross-reference to action 3 in the action list and highlight how this matter's going to be addressed. Back to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So your action list contains an action around which corporate risk control policies as committee you should review. So we've considered this as part of the review of the policy. As Hannah just outlined, we've identified under section 2.3 of the risk management policy other arrangements which are integral to managing and are part of strategic risks. So these are health and safety, emergency planning, insurance, finance, internal audit, information governance and cyber security, some of which I know you already have oversight of as a committee, others maybe you haven't had as much or any sight of in your forward work programme so far. So our proposal is, as they are embedded in our linked to our strategic risk management policy, we think they're appropriate and logical that the committee has oversight of them. We've proposing that as each of those arrangements has has different arrangements in place. It's important they're considered each individually and in context of the various governance and accountability arrangements they have. But as a first step in your oversight of that, we've proposed, in agreement with the Deputy Chief Executive as well, we've provided to your forward work programme for July and like them to bring together a composite overview of each of those as the first step in your oversight, and then as a committee you can take a view from there. So that's our proposal to respond to the action plan, obviously subject to your views, Chair, and the committees.
Thank you. Before we go to questions, just to say thank you very much, Richard and Hannah, for great work here. I've had the opportunity to speak to Richard several times and provide comment and feedback, and much of my feedback has been addressed in the draft, in the version you have before you, which really pleases me. Without wishing to constrain any comments, questions or concerns this committee has, my personal view, and it's a personal view, is that this is the best articulation of a risk management framework I've seen in the public sector in Wales by quite some margin. And that's a real sort of credit to the team involved with this. And Peter, if you could just take that compliment, it is a great work. And I'm really pleased with the progress made in terms of starting to articulate a risk appetite. That is a foundation for all good risk management, and many public sector organisations shy away from that or pay lip service. And I'm really pleased with the high quality intellect applied to this challenging piece of work. Saying all of that, there's some real challenges now about operationalising and embedding this, and this is where the senior leadership team, I look to Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Executive, to take an active lead in supporting Richard and team in this endeavour, because it's essential to the ongoing viability and success of this council. I'll pause there, I've got a few other comments to make, but let's go to questions and comments, please. Members.
I thought you'd look across at me then. I agree with what you say. It was a slog going through it. I'd admit that. It was a real slog, but it was all there. And, it was difficult to punch any holes in it, really. But, yeah, it was a very, very comprehensive report, so well done.
Thank you, Phil. Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Richard and Hannah, for that work. Just really something that perhaps we as a committee could recommend to perhaps one of the scrutiny committees or cabinet member to pick up on from the report. And that's on 2.3.2, reference there to the Gwent Local Resilience Forum, and in particular to the Community Risk Register. That register is clearly written for the public to read, you can see from the language and so on. But I suspect that the great majority of our residents are blissfully unaware of that document, although I've no doubt it's hidden away. Well, no, not hidden away. It's secure somewhere on our website. I just wonder if we could recommend that either one of the scrutiny committees or whoever have a look at whether we should be doing more to publicise that register, so that residents A, know what they can do to help themselves, but B, also know what we as a council can do to help them if the risks become realities. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Richard, able to give a response to that, please?
Yeah, I think it's clearly an important part of our arrangements, and that's why we've identified it in there in terms of we'll be looking at that from an organisational perspective. So relevant risks to Monmouthshire County Council's delivery of its objectives will also feature on our strategic risk register as well. I think in terms of clarifying the roles and responsibilities, as I just mentioned, emergency planning will be one of those areas, linked arrangements that we're proposing to bring back to you in July, Chair. Clearly that register is an important part of it. So in terms of any further action or oversight, it might be helpful for the committee to receive that paper, and then you determine any other further scrutiny or activity as a result of that.
Yep, that sounds a sensible way forward. Thank you, Richard. Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and I just reiterate your comments. I think it's a terrific piece of work, really comprehensive. There's presumably going to be some training alongside this again to make sure that people understand what their roles and responsibilities are in this, particularly the introduction of Directorate Risk Register, I think, is a really excellent way of connecting, because it feels like a big gap from 50 to 1. And hopefully that means the Directorate senior leadership teams can have regular discussions about that. I presume somebody is the risk management champion. I don't know if it's you, Richard, but somebody in the organisation has that role. And so somebody put some challenge into the process. So when the Director of Risk Registers do exist and things bubble up to the Corporate Risk Register, that somebody says, why that and what's happening here? And, we just check it and being, putting a level of challenge into the risk register. I think that would be important. There's a really interesting comment about risk tolerance in here, which I always describe as the number of plates you're able to spin at once. And that's really interesting as well, because you can have individual risks and they can add up into something considerably bigger. So I'm pleased you've tried to articulate that. There's a section on risk appetite, and I hear, Hannah, what you say about a range, but I think that risk appetite statements are guidelines, and there may be exceptional circumstances where you go outside even a range. But if something happens that the upside is so big, you might want to take that risk. And I think it's worth saying it's okay to go outside these as long as it's the magic phrase. And if Audit Wales were here now, they'd still say this: well-managed risk taking is what they're after. So if you've considered all the upsides and all the downsides, and you've made a decision and it goes wrong, they won't kick you for it. Well, that's what they say in theory. Hopefully we won't get that point. And finally, on horizon scanning, I think it's also great that you've mentioned that. I just wonder, there's a lot of discussion in the paper about world and UK events that might sort of come our way. There's also local things which you might think about, and I wonder how you incorporate some more local horizon scanning, and whether there's going to be a risk management group of sort of willing people who are going to have that sort of little bit of blue sky thinking every now and again. That might be really helpful. And if you really want to take your risk register to the next level, you can actually have the horizon scanning built into your risk register in terms of how far away is the risk. And I've seen some risk registers, as well as your red, amber, green for the scale of the risk, there's also a proximity alert, which in some places have used blue as the sky is blue, it's a long way away, or grey, the clouds are coming in, and black, it's raining, and it's here. And I think that's quite helpful as well in terms of understanding how far some of these things are, because if it's legislation, it might be a couple of years down the road, but we know it's coming, versus a here and a now kind of risk. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank Martin for the comments. I think, overall, it raises a very important point. Thank committee chair and everyone for your feedback. It's a team effort, particularly involving Hannah, but a wide range of colleagues, so we'll take that back. I think the important point you mentioned there, Martin, is about then embedding this. I think, Hannah may kick me under the table for this, but this is almost the first part. The big part then is actually operationalising this and applying it, and making sure people are trained, understand what it means, applying it within the context it's meant to be applied, and applying it robustly as well. I think that that is the next step for us. In terms of our self-assessment report we bring to you as a committee, we will be looking to both test ourselves on that, and give you assurance or any areas where we think we're still to develop. Part of our proposal is to bring this forward over over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of embedding different parts of this policy once it's approved by Cabinet, hopefully in June, and that allows us time to make sure actually that those requirements are understood, the processes and structures where they're not currently in place or they need to tweak are changed, and that understanding of the arrangements is really important. I think you made a good point about risk appetite, and it is those guidelines. It's partly why we went for a range, is to provide that guidelines, but that needs to be applied appropriately, and both in terms of well-managed risk taking, which is ultimately the heart of what this paper is trying to get to. We do, as a team, provide some challenge to any new risks coming forward, but ultimately also then we've got those responsibility holders within the process set out in the policy to actually make those decisions as well, to determine what's escalated and de-escalated off the strategic risk register, and guided by guidance as well. And thanks for the helpful comments on sort of horizon scanning. I think an area that hopefully be valuable in informing not just the next few months but the next few years in terms of our risk management and our policy development as well. And certainly looking local as well as regional and national trends will be important. And again, something we'll be keen to engage a range with both partners locally and regionally and nationally in terms of the evidence we can gather to inform that. And again, some of those challenges won't be unique to Monmouthshire, but some will be more localised in a different way or present themselves specifically in Monmouthshire we need to be aware of. So thanks. We know a lot more to come.
Great, thank you. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. It's only just very brief input. First of all, I probably don't want to take the plaudits, as was maybe being suggested earlier, to recognise, I think, what's an excellent piece of work. I think that's been, with Matt Gatehouse and obviously Richard and Hannah. But I think it's probably worthwhile me mentioning, just echoing, I guess, Richard and Hannah brought this in front of strategic leadership team a few weeks ago. I think the reaction and the response was very similar to your own chair and that of the committee. I think this is an excellent piece of work. It was unanimously supported. I think it's the next stage of evolution, I think, in terms of our risk management arrangements. I'm also particularly pleased in the way that the debate and the conversation took place at SLT, in the sense of really pushing back at immediate adoption, and in fact that point of 6 to 12 month lead-in, because actually it's affording what is in fact the necessary time, I think, for us to be able to transition up into those arrangements and make sure that they are, using Richard's words, properly and appropriately embedded. I think the final point really is back to the action on the action log that I think Richard has talked well to. And I think there seems to be general comfort about bringing that report back in July. But clearly there'll be a piece there just in terms of being able to demonstrate back to the committee the arrangements. I think, Rich, probably take a second opportunity hand in hand with it to maybe take the policy now in its rewritten form and being able to actually apply that lens to it as well. So it's maybe cutting our teeth with the new and updated policy on those identified corporate arrangements. I think it's probably a really healthy thing to do up front.
Okay, thank you. So let's look to conclude this matter. If we turn our attention back to paragraph 2, recommendations, it is a view of this committee that it recommends the policy for adoption by the council. It is comfortable with the self-assessment results as set out within the body of this paper, and it is comfortable with the proposed way to address the action 3 in the action list by means of bringing forward a paper to this committee in July, setting out relevant information. So thank you one and all. We will now move to the next item, which is the internal audit plan at agenda item 7. This paper will be introduced by Jan Vertek, our Acting Chief Internal Auditor. Jan, as per usual, assume we've read the paper, but draw out key points, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this report aims to inform members of the Governance and Audit Committee on the work to be undertaken by the internal audit team at an operational level during the 24-25 financial year, and I'm requesting that the committee review, comment and approves this audit plan. So the mission of internal audit, and the reason why we're here, is to enhance and protect organisational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice and insight. We're an independent team. We provide objective assurance and also consultant activities designed to add value and to improve the organisation's operations. We use a systematic approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of the risk management framework, the control and governance processes within the council. So the audit planning process takes into account all possible systems, processes, sections, establishments that could be audited within Monmouthshire. This includes all services, activities and functions which Monmouthshire commissions and or delivers via a third party or via collaborative and partnership arrangements. For the 24-25 audit plan, the total number of available days amounted to 1,300. That was based on 5 full-time equivalent auditors in the team for a full year. We then take off an allowance for planned annual leave, any sickness, are estimated sickness, training, management time and admin time, which is deducted and to give us our operational audit days for the year. So that calculation has left us with 813 operational days, which we allocate across all service area directorates on a risk basis. So the summary of that can be seen as Appendix 1 in the report. Within this 813 days, we also set aside 70 days for any special investigations where there could be allegations of fraud, theft or bribery against employees of the organisation, and to also complete any reactive work as we need to. If the Internal Audit Service were to complete a review of each of the service areas which were either due for audit or had not yet been audited during the next financial year, the resource required for the team would amount to around 2,873 audit days. Therefore, the audit plan has had to be risk assessed and prioritised to match the resource of the team. Chief officers and all heads of service were given the opportunity to contribute and to shape the audit plan. The initial plan was provided to a meeting of the strategic leadership team, along with chief officers and their departmental management teams to discuss and to refine. A copy of the draft audit plan was also due to be presented to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on the 14th of March this year. However, as the meeting was cancelled, a copy of the covering report and the audit plan was sent to all members via email as an opportunity to provide comment and to highlight any requests. These have been taken account when devising the final version of the plan. So there's a couple of key changes between the draft and the final audit plan. These are highlighted within section 3.13 of the report, the majority of which were work in progress at the end of the financial year, which we didn't quite get over the line to be issued as draft by the 31st of March. It's important to highlight that this plan may change as the year progresses, especially if the risk profile of our audit work changes. It is intended that the audit plan remains fluid and will be dependent on any new priorities or risks emerging to the Council, so we can do reactive work as and when we need to. This plan will therefore be reviewed quarterly by myself as the Acting Chief Internal Auditor and discussed regularly with the Deputy Chief Executive and Chief Officer of Resources and also the Chair of the Governance and Audit Committee as and when necessary. If we do need to significantly change the audit plan, that will be brought back to the committee for further approval. Consideration is given throughout the audit plan for the appropriate level of resources for internal audit at Monmouthshire County Council. The current establishment of 5 members of staff remains just about adequate for the current level of assessed risk, although this will be considered as part of a later item on today's agenda. It's worth noting that if there was any unplanned absences, such as long-term sickness, secondments, prolonged investigations or prolonged reactive work undertaken, this could significantly impact on the audit plan as cover is limited. So the 24-25 audit plan is attached as Appendix 2 to the report. The audit jobs have been risk assessed and prioritised, which matches to our available resource for the year. We therefore have 47 audit opinion jobs and 25 non-opinion jobs incorporated into the plan, and it is my opinion that this will be sufficient audit work and coverage to provide informed end-of-year audit opinion to committee this time next year. So Governance and Audit Committee are responsible, as per the terms of reference of the committee, to approve and monitor the internal audit plan over the course of the year. Quarterly reports will be presented promptly by myself, informing committee of the current progress against the approved plan, the opinions issued and a summary of all unfavourable reports. The committee's role is to hold officers to account and provide oversight of the audit process and the organisational system of internal control. I therefore ask committee to approve the 24-25 audit plan and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jan. Questions or comments, please? Martin.
Thank you, Jan. That's very comprehensive, as always. One thing I don't get a flavour from the table of the Appendix 2, which lists the audits. You have yes-nos as to audits are due, and then alongside the ones you have chosen, there's a risk level of mediums and highs, obviously no low-level ones. All the ones that are yes, but you're not including, I presume they are lower risk level than the ones you have included. I presume that's right.
It's a good question. So in terms of the column with audit due, so that's basically any area that either has not been audited or hasn't been audited within a 5-year period. We then risk assess each individual review to ensure that we concentrate on the jobs that need to be done within a year. So a good example could be, second one on the list, budgetary control capital. That would be a high-risk review. It is due. There are a number of reasons why that has not been included within the audit plan for the current year, but it will be picked up most likely next year as part of the audit plan. So there could be other ones like that. It's all part of the risk assessment process.
Thank you, Jan. I figured there was more to it than meets the eye initially. Okay, that's helpful. I'll come back to resources in a second. But one thing you brought my attention to was powers 3.7 and 3.8. As you said, they've got 5 whole-time equivalent staff, which add up to 1,300 days. And then you've said an allowance for leave, sickness, training, management time and admin is deducted, and that brings us down to about 800 days. So we lose 500 days, or I don't know what the heck's that, best part of, it's over a third of our time into non-productive audit work. And it'd be interesting when we talk about key performance indicators. I thought that's not a particularly good place to be in. I understand entirely staff are entitled to leave and if staff are off sick, etc. But that feels like a big chunk of training, management, admin from our work. I just highlight to that. The other question I was going to ask is around volume of work and the width versus depth, and whether 72 jobs is too many jobs, whether you could do more jobs or you could do less jobs, how long it takes, those kind of questions. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, so in terms of your first point, it does seem a lot of time. Obviously, annual leave and bank holidays is statutory obligations. We have to take that off. We have been quite frugal in terms of the calculation. It is all done scientifically in terms of across the team to do this calculation. So we put in a nominal amount of sickness. Obviously, we don't know, and hopefully none of my team will be sick over the next year. But we have to put in a figure on that. Obviously, if there is spare capacity during the year, sickness allocation has not been used up, management time has not been used up, admin time has not been used up, then members of the team can do potential unplanned work, and we add that back into the reactive time. Or where a job has overrun for whatever reasons, there could be additional work required out on site, then that can be used to offset some of that time as well. In terms of your second question, in terms of depth versus the number of audit jobs, that's part of our risk assessment for each individual audit review. So at the start of the year, in that audit plan, I put in an estimate of time that we need available for each job. So that's based on cumulative audit knowledge. That's not to say that a job might not overrun, because I put it down as 15 days and it might require 20 because of the level of depth that we need to go in to during that review. So each individual review is scoped. We ensure that we cover all the high-risk areas within that. Obviously, if we had more time, we could cover more areas, but we are trying to get as much audit work done, as much coverage across the council done with our resource.
Thank you. We'll go to Peter next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. It's clear from your report and from your answers that you've got a team who are dealing with a very heavy workload that you're only able to deal with through very careful planning. Are you able to sort of reassure us that your team are feeling positive about their work, that they're not feeling overwhelmed by that amount of work, so that they're perhaps suffering from excessive levels of stress and anxiety? Because that in itself is a risk, both from the point of view of our duty of care to our staff, but also in terms of, if we have those situations, then people do start to go off sick and so on, and then the necessary work doesn't get done, things slip under the radar, and so on. So I wonder if you could comment on the general level of morale amongst your team.
Yep, thank you for the question. Yeah, so I'm not going to lie, audit work is very challenging. The team are quite often put in quite uncomfortable situations, especially when they go out on site. They have to ask a lot of questions that potentially sometimes are not welcome, and obviously deal with that accordingly then, especially if management disagree with the line of questioning or the recommendations which they then issue. So it is auditing is a difficult job. It's my role as the manager of the team to ensure that the team morale is there, that members of staff feel supported when they do audits, when they go out on site. I like to think that I support the team and make sure that they know they've got someone's got their back when they go out and ask these questions. I'd like to say that the morale in the team is quite good at the moment, and as we move on, I'm not going to say that, like I said, it's a difficult job, and the proof will be as staff remaining happy, staff remaining in work and issuing audit reports.
Yeah, just to say thank you for that. Don't make yourself a hostage to fortune. No, don't take great care. And thanks for the clarity of that answer and that little insight you've given us into the difficulties of the nature of the job and certain circumstances, which I think many of us just don't appreciate unless we're reminded about it. Thank you.
Just as an addition, maybe, noting that there's an inherent tension between the auditee and the auditor. But generally, auditors are treated with respect throughout Monmouthshire. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct, Chair.
Great. Okay, we'll go to Rodri next, then Sarah. Rodri, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just thinking in terms of forward planning, Jan, at 4.7, it says about the global internal audit standards becoming mandatory in January, but that you're currently waiting for the guidance. I just wondered, in terms of timescales, in terms of you getting that guidance and what the likely impact would be in terms of your work schedule going forward.
Thank you. Yeah, so the latest that we've heard, which I believe was the start of last week, was that there's still no decision that's been made on if the public sector internal audit standards are going to be updated in light of the new global internal audit standards, or whether the global internal audit standards will be implemented across the public sector in the UK. The last I heard was that although the global standards are effective from the 1st of January, it's likely that the public sector will have at least until the 31st of March before they have to come on board with whatever standards are going to be put in place, but they're still considering whether the public sector standards themselves will be updated or we go on to the global standards. So at the moment, it's a wait and see. I don't think many heads of audit are quite happy with that. We want to get going. If we need to make changes, we want to make them. I know I've got a presentation down on the work programme to give committee, which we keep on pushing back because there's no point in doing it until we know what we're actually going to be playing with. So it is on our radar, and we will look to implement as soon as we know.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thanks, Chair. A related question to Peter's, I suspect, and that Chair knows that I've always said that strong audit is what enables an operational manager to sleep at night. I was concerned to see that in the audit plan a number of areas which had not been audited for some time, or indeed in some cases ever, presumably because they were regarded as low risk. But I'm just, to what extent do you feel the team is playing catch up on previous years and things that have not been thoroughly audited previously?
I don't want to say that it hasn't been thoroughly audited previously. It is just the volume of transactions, the volume of areas that a council will and has to manage. We can't get across to everyone. I mentioned that ideally we'd look at every area across a 5-year period. I think that is nigh on impossible. The amount of actions and the amount of teams across the council that would require some oversight, and then there's certain reviews that we want to do every year or every other year. Some of the fundamental financial systems like council tax, debt recovery, we want to look at those more often than other areas. So unfortunately that means certain areas that are considered more lower risk would get pushed back, and likewise the new duties that the council take on at the same time. So some of the things that have never been audited, it might be because it's been a relatively new duty, so we're waiting for a period of time for the service to embed themselves before we then come in and look at them. So there's a number of reasons why an area might not have been audited. Obviously we want to get across to everyone. I'd love that column to say everyone's done within the 5-year period. In reality, it's just not going to happen unless Pete decides to give me an extra 5 or 6 members of staff, but that's going to be for his decision.
Yeah, I think Jan's answered that well. I mean, I think the only supplementary I'd add to it is in probably describing the horizontals and the verticals of the organisation. So, there's a nature of, a variety of the audit work that's within the audit plan that I guess is cross-cutting. And you look to get those assurances around, for example, payroll as being, a good example of, and that allows us to be able to get that sort of overarching sort of level of comfort, or at least where inherently you see those controls playing out through the organisation. But by its very nature, internal audit is, going back to, I guess, Richard's last item, it's an assessment of risk on the basis of, the best intelligence that you have at a moment in time. And I guess even an internal audit plan, and the one you see now, is iterative in that nature. There may be risks that will materialise during the year, and it happens. Audit work will switch out and in accordingly, and that's the way it should operate. But yeah, you're never going to get through a local authority a whole array of local authority services, even in a 5-year time frame. But we do have wider business intelligence. It's not always an internal audit that will give you a level of comfort with regards to the robustness of arrangements within one service area to another. There's other lenses that are applied as well. And again, all of that feeds in to the construct of what you've got in front of you now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any of the hands raised, so we'll look to conclude by saying thank you for the paper, very helpful, and this committee approves the audit plan as set out. Move on to item 8. Item 8 is the external QA of internal audit. So back to you, Jan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to inform the committee of the external quality assessment, EQA, of the internal audit team, which has been recently undertaken to ensure compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. The public sector standards require internal audit teams to undergo an external quality assessment once every 5 years, and this should be undertaken by a qualified independent reviewer from outside of the organisation. It was agreed by Section 151 officers and the Welsh Chief Auditors Group that each local authority would complete an internal self-assessment, which would be validated by an external reviewer from an independent council. This approach was used for the last EQA, which was completed in May 2018, and has continued to be the approach undertaken across the public sector over the past couple of years. It's important to note that the external assessment should have been completed by May 23 on basis of the 5-year period from May 18. However, due to the resignation of the previous Chief Internal Auditor in April 23 and myself coming into post later that month, it was agreed that this EQA would be delayed until Q4 of the 23-24 financial year to allow for an honest evaluation and validation process to take place. So Monmouthshire's peer review was undertaken during Q4, and this was done by the acting internal audit manager, who has the head of internal audit responsibilities at Caerphilly County Borough Council. They are provided with all the self-assessment information, associated documents and evidence as they saw fit to request. The results of the peer review assessment and the validation process can be seen as Appendix 1, which is the final assessment report. In summary, the review confirmed that the Monmouthshire Internal Audit Team generally conforms with the public sector internal audit standards, and the areas of non-conformance were not considered to be significant. There was one area of non or partial conformance and 3 actions required to strengthen the existing areas. The area of non or partial conformance was that the EQA was delayed past its May 23 due date. This was deemed minor by the assessor and not material to the overall assessment. So the required action is to obviously complete the external assessment and ensure that this report is presented to the committee. There are 3 areas for consideration which would help the team strengthen the team's conformance. So it's amending the core principles of internal audit practice based on the new global standards, which will be done as part of a review of the internal audit charter once we know these. Including a direct link and a direct reference for the local code of corporate governance within the audit charter. So again, that will be completed when we review our audit charter later this year. And to implement a standardised CPD recording process across the team, which has already been implemented. So we had identified these as areas for improvement within our self-assessment, and that was confirmed by the head of audit at Caerphilly. So that's our external report, can be seen as Appendix 1, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Martin?
Not a question, but just an observation. I think it's a terrific outcome for you and the team, Jan, and I think generally conforms is such a sentence which doesn't convey how good a report it is, because there is no higher level than generally conforms. It absolutely conforms is what it should say, and I'm really pleased, so congratulations you and your team.
Yeah, thank you. We clearly I would echo those remarks, so well done. Please pass on our gratitude and thanks to your team as well. Are there any more questions or comments? No? Okay, in that case we conclude by noting the very satisfactory report. Many thanks. Okay, item 9, the implementation of internal audit agreed recommendations. Back to you, Jan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so my final report is the monitoring of implementation of recommendations issued during the 22-23 financial year. So the purpose of this report is to provide committee with an update on the progress that operational managers have made implementing these recommendations, and to also confirm that this report has been presented previously to the Council's strategic leadership team. So again, a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards is that we monitor and ensure that management actions or recommendations have been effectively implemented, or that senior management have accepted any risks of not taking appropriate action. So we conducted our follow-up work in January 24. We excluded one report which was issued with a limited audit opinion, which was Our Lady in St Michael's Primary School. Due to the unfavourable opinion, the school was subject to a formal follow-up audit visit which took place during March 24. So the results from the follow-up audit will be reported to the school chief auditor and to the Governance and Audit Committee in due course during the next meeting, but I can say that it was a more favourable opinion. Our approach to completing the follow-up work was based on the fact that all recommendations and action plans are for managers to implement within their agreed timescales. So the most effective use of our resource was to contact managers to complete a self-assessment. They provided the details as to the progress made, and we reviewed the responses to ensure that senior management have taken the necessary action. So overall, during the 22-23 financial year, we issued 82 recommendations, and Table 1 within the report provides a summary of the findings. It's pleasing to note that overall 84% of recommendations had either been fully or partially implemented. Where they had been partially implemented, the details of the actions taken to date, along with the revised implementation dates, were provided by the manager and reviewed by the audit team, and we were happy with those explanations. There were 8 recommendations which were stated as not yet being implemented. The reasons for their delay was reviewed by the audit team, and new target dates for implementation were confirmed by managers. As Table 2 shows, the majority of these were due to a timing issue. We followed it up in January. Of the 8, 5 of them were due to be implemented by the 31st of March. So it was already in train, the actions were already being taken. The other actions which are delayed between June to December. There are reasons why, and we're comfortable that those revised implementation dates are correct. There was 3 recommendations where managers effectively decided to accept the risk associated with the original audit findings. Although it's disappointing to note that the recommendations will not be fully implemented, we are of the opinion that the acceptance of these risks will not result in any undue risk being borne by the authority. This report, as I mentioned, has already been presented to a meeting of the Council Strategic Leadership Team in February this year. Chief officers are made aware of the recommendations outstanding within their portfolio, and the Chief Executive has asked that all Chief Officers review the report and satisfy themselves that appropriate action is being taken by management, especially where the risks had been accepted, and that the Chief Officer was also comfortable to accept that risk in addition to management. So that's the report, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments on this report, please? Okay, no, looks like a clean bit of health. Clearly, if anything changes in terms of, for example, the chief officers disagree with the view of their direct report, please update us. Otherwise, I think we can note that report and be comforted by what's been set out there. Thank you once again. We'll now move on to item 10. Item 10 is the proposed future delivery model for internal audit. And I'll ask Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Executive, to introduce the paper. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I think this has been a subject of ongoing reference for the benefit of the committee to understand how we're going to look to consolidate and move forward with the Internal Audit Service. And given the former Chief Internal Auditor, Andrew Wathen, leaving probably about 12 months ago, committee will be aware that we were exploring conversations around a variety of potential collaborative endeavours. And notwithstanding, I know Jan highlighted the interest earlier, but Jan's been working very closely with me and through a variety of other conversations to look to develop a much more mature position and obviously a business case that looks to present a set of options and obviously a recommended option to move forward. Undoubtedly, I'm working on the basis that committee members have obviously read through the report, and you'll see that the conclusion that is reached there is for us to recommend that we remain actually in-house, but importantly to consolidate both the resources, the skills and the nature of the roles within the team. And that's as a consequence, and I think as the committee will know, I think it's been certainly a desire of mine and certainly the chairs as much as the committees to make sure that we draw swift conclusion in terms of the way forward. The report, I think, has represented in report form quite an awful lot of work that's gone through by way of discussions and looking through the detail, and you'll understand, I guess, by the options assessed that those aspects of looking at cost and independence and flexibility that each of those models obviously offers. Some of those options, I think that we were exploring, fell away quite quickly by way of the conversations that we sort of evolved, and even though that they stood on similar fair footing, I guess, in terms of their scoring. I think probably the most mature collaborative arrangement and probably potential option for us in comparison to the in-house option was the regional internal audit service that's currently in place. But we've engaged in a number of purposeful discussions with them around that, and they've, to their credit, they've been very open in terms of sharing of detail and information, both in terms of structures and costs and the like, and for us to be able to assess and weigh and understand that against, I guess, the option that we're recommending to remain in-house. You'll see from the report that, in fact, if we had been to entertain the Regional Internal Audit Service, that would have actually ended up costing us more. yes, I understand there is invariably a point in terms of resilience, which is what will come into play whenever you look at any collaboration, in all honesty. But I don't think that, in fact, outweighed, I guess, those other factors of cost and independence and flexibility that's afforded by the in-house model. I think it's important to note the experience that we've had, and I'm happy to put that on the record in terms of, I think, you've seen it, meeting on meeting in terms of, what Jan has looked to achieve, and to I think the questions about the morale of the team earlier. I've, been very much in a place of having that straight talking discussion with the team and with Jan. And I've welcomed the nature of them coming back to me quite early on in terms of informal feedback, and they're very, very pleased in terms of the trajectory they've taken and under Jan's leadership. But I don't think I need to tell you that. I think you've seen that. So in the quality of the reports that are coming through. So naturally, and this is an important part, I think, of just, I'm talking here publicly on live stream. I do want to thank the Regional Internal Audit Service for the opportunity they've presented at this moment in time. And it's not to say that there is any door shut on any collaboration, actually. Going forward, I think that would be sort of a naive statement to make. I think Jan, as well as myself, recognises that the world is never a dynamic and changing place. I think we all know that. But certainly I want to offer the team stability in order to consolidate off the back of what's been a really good first year under Jan's leadership. But I've rightly had to demonstrate that through the business case and the report that's in front of you today. I think that the sensible decisions through both of us, myself and Jan, and working with the team, I think it's been recognised the slight change of shape of the team structure. I think the need for a full-time equivalent chief internal auditor, I think, is quite key. And I don't think I'm going to criticise the previous arrangement where we shared one with Newport. But I think the experience, I think, of, or at least having the opportunity to be able to consolidate that more fully as one full-time equivalent, I think, given the environment that we're in, nature of the debate today, and in terms of, having somebody who's going to be able to offer that level of dedicated time in that senior role and that senior position. I know we've got to go through process in and around that, and that's the interest you're showing clearly at the outset of the meeting. But I think the fraud aspect is also very important as well, inherent within that. I think Jan, and I think we both knew, and I think the committee knows, that there's a need to. I'm not got a concern around our arrangements. I think I just want an additional level of rigour in and around those arrangements. And again, given we talked about risk through this meeting, and that's an area that all public bodies are facing in terms of those inherent risks of fraud. As much as you have Sian and Kath come in to talk about cybersecurity. There are areas that we have rightly invested in recent years to strengthen our capabilities, and I think now is the right time to do the same in and around our internal audit work. So yeah, the report, I think, talks to itself. I'm really interested to just sort of get feedback from the committee and to hopefully get the endorsement of the committee to sort of move in this direction, and certainly for this next period of time. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. We'll go to questions. We'll start with Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Two questions. Well, one a comment, the other is a question. 4.11, you've touched on the detachment of a shared service. Was that your experience of the previous way we operated, or was it a shared service or a shared person at that time? The other question is, there's an indication that there's an increase in fraud. At have you been able to identify where that fraud, why it's increased, where it's come from? I noticed we've got detection regions to find it out, but is this something pre-pandemic or post-pandemic that's caused a lot of homeworking and things like that, which might create fraud? I'm assuming it's fraud within the organisation rather than fraud outside the organisation.
So in response to the first question, it was a shared post. It wasn't a collaboration in the fullest sense, even though I think a deepening of collaboration with Newport was one of the options that is obviously presented in the paper. I think Newport, and I think if Myrian, my counterpart, was here today, I think he'd probably acknowledge one and the same. They're in a different position to us as a result of I think vacancies that they've suffered through a period of time. They've looked to buy in from the market, and I guess they were in a slightly different position in terms of understanding fundamentally what their next steps were. I think in the way that we've been able to consolidate, over this last year, we're in a different position really in assessing our options. So yeah, on that one, and again, to my early comment, there's no criticism there in terms of what was there before. I think it's just the opportunity of time and for us to assess, what the most appropriate next step is. Sorry, remind me on the second question. Sorry, fraud.
The other was regarding the preponderance, or I use the word preponderance, it might be wrong, of an increased level of fraud, finding fraud prevention, obviously. Is this something which has come from post-pandemic, which might be homework and things like that?
So I guess if we sit the pandemic very specifically when we talk about things like business grants aside, then we've not got a pattern of significant fraud, even despite the fact that we've got good arrangements in place. The increased incident of fraud is something that is being seen across public sector. So invariably we would be complacent, I think, to just sit on our laurels of low levels of fraud and just be comfortable with the arrangements that we have. It's the need now for us to establish now that more dedicated role, and that can suitably inform, I guess, me and Jan and the committee, and in a similar way to what I just touched on with cybersecurity, and how we've evolved that in recent years. That'll guide us again in terms of the next step of our journey.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Peter, I'm a little surprised, I guess, that it's cheaper to be in-house than to join with other organisations, and I think you inferred that's because we pay less.
Pay less, and the gradings in which the way that they assimilate across, because they sit differently, and in terms of with the regional internal audit service to us, and that leads to upward trajectory in terms of assimilation over.
Okay.
So it's a combination of. It's probably the latter rather than the former, I think, isn't it?
Okay, so I was thinking about the risk is clearly if there are other organisations which are paying more for services, we won't have Jan for long because he'll go and go get more money somewhere else. For example, of course he wouldn't because he loves it here. And the other thing about having a smaller team is the specialties, and it isn't directly addressed, I don't think, in the paper, things like cyber and IT audit, very specialist areas. Will we have that facility in-house, or will we have to go and buy that in?
Yeah, I think it's to the extent that we need to determine as to whether that needs to be drawn in or it can be developed, I guess, inherently within the team. It's also and it's a conversation to be worked through. So, for example, if we take something like the shared resource service, the SRS, which you've had a level of exposure on in the last cycle, and I guess Torvine has got a level of experience in that and undertakes the internal audit work in that area. So sometimes that answer is not too far away in terms of being able to identify the means to achieve that.
Thank you. I think that's helpful. I'm supportive of the paper, I guess, because it's a reasoned position to be in, but it feels to be running against the way the world is moving in local government, where individual organisations can't afford to stand on their own yet. In this case, we seem to be able to, and indeed it clearly works out to be the case. I wonder whether there's a role for corporate joint committees and sharing across Gwent, etc. But that got ruled out pretty early on in this, didn't it?
Yeah, and I'll probably make note of, because it's public, RCT stepped away from the Regional Internal Audit Service in recent months. They'll have done that for their own reasons, and in terms of, I guess, as I understand it, a bit of a consolidation and focus in terms of on their own internal governance, because they felt that I think in the way that it's been described, at least, it's allowed them to comes back to, I guess, that bit around flexibility and being able to being really clear in terms of where you direct your internal audit resource. It's just worth to note that. And then the other bit on collaboration is, collaboration in all walks of life in public service needs to be very carefully thought through. You do not just collaborate for the sake of collaboration. It's got to be for the right reasons. So, yeah, any assessment's got to be a thoughtful one.
Okay, Phil, please.
Yeah, I was pleased to see the enhanced structure, particularly in the current climate. Quite refreshing, really, to see a team enhanced rather than depleted. I mean, obviously, you accept that if we lose somebody, there's a problem within the team, but that's life, isn't it? But no, I think it's the right proposal.
I was just going to touch, Peter, on RCT, because I understand their model was to move performance closer together with internal audit, which that seems a bit counterintuitive to me, that internal audit can hold performance back, and they're perhaps not best placed to be too close together. So obviously, having three performance experts in front of me, perhaps that's an answer for someone else. But it didn't seem sensible to me.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so a couple of comments and one question, I think. Thank you, Peter, for the paper. I'm grateful to officers for early sight of draft this paper and the opportunity to provide feedback. I think it's a very good, well thought out paper, and clearly very supportive of the recommendation. I think it was important for our people, that is for staff, and this committee, that we give certainty in terms of what the target operating model was, and come to a swift and very sensible conclusion. So yet again, thank you, Peter, for your hard work in pulling this together. So clearly the recommendations accepted. My question is around timetable and or next steps. I think the paper was silent on that. Could you just give us some insights in terms of what the next steps are, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just reminded me, it just allows me the opportunity to come back in, because there was one important piece I forgot to mention, which is that as you'd naturally expect as part of a proper process, there's been a level of staff consultation, that's extended obviously beyond Jan, but with the rest of the team. Really good feedback received, but again, very supportive in terms of the direction of travel, but not in a way of the option that being chosen is of course the option of least change for such colleagues. They have actually come back in with very constructive comment, I guess, and in terms of how this can actually look to put the Internal Audit Service on stronger footing going forward. So that's just good to acknowledge. So we've already been through that hurdle. Back to your point on timeline. So that's cleared. So on the basis of an endorsement today by the Governance and Audit Committee, we will be almost immediately looking to make move. Therefore, I'm looking to try and streamline the process as much as I'm able to, but obviously in offering fair opportunity, I guess, for the roles that are obviously brought forward as part of the process. So I wouldn't want to get. Touch wood. I wouldn't want to get past the summer, really, with us not having this all implemented and through.
Okay, that sounds positive. Thank you very much. So clearly you have the committee's endorsement and look forward to an update in terms of when it's actually been implemented. Thank you once again. We'll now move on to item 12. Item 12 is the reformatted committee forward work plan. May I just pass my thanks to Wendy and I think Cheryl for the work they've been involved with in terms of developing it. I was content with the content, but were there any questions or comments from members? No. We'll then move on to the minutes of a previous meeting. Yet again, I've reviewed these and have no particular comments or questions, but may look to members for their views.
Happy to approve, Chair.
Okay, we will approve those minutes. Thank you. And the final, beg your pardon, I should have just confirmed we've already addressed item 11, so at the top end of this meeting. The final then matter is to confirm the date of the next meeting. Hopefully, it's new diaries, 6th of June. And I think that concludes this committee meeting. So thank you, one and all.